Who wants to talk about this? This Vinegar Syndrome 4K UHD slipbox release of the 1993 horror film The Dark Half. The Dark Half is based on a novel by Stephen King. Now, I did read this book back in the day. I read the book before I saw the film, and I saw the film in the theater, which was a cool experience at the time. And I'm going to talk about that here, a little bit more my impression of that here in just a little bit, my impression of this new 4K release as well upon rewatching it. Most people, when they hear the name Stephen King, the first thing that they think about, most of the time the only thing they think about is the film he directed, which is Maximum Overdrive. I'm just kidding about that. He wrote a few other novels. He has a few other novels floating about out there that some people may or may not have read. But he did write the book that The Dark Half is based on. Now, The Dark Half is directed by George A. Romero. Stephen King and George A. Romero also previously collaborated on films like Creepshow 2 and Creepshow without any, it's just Creepshow 1. But these were based on the short stories. But this is it's unique in a way because it is a feature film that George Romero directed, and it was based on a novel by Stephen King, which is quite awesome. George Romero is mostly known for his zombie films like Night of the Living Dead, Day of the Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Diary of the Dead, Land of the Dead, and a bunch of other of the Dead films. But he's very well known for that sort of zombie sort of thing. But here he went for a bigger studio production. Orion Studio produced this. This was one of Orion Studio's last films before it went bankrupt. Now they were going bankrupt at the time as they were finishing the movie up, but they were luckily able to eventually get it out there. Now, I recently did a review of George Romero's previous film that he also did for a studio, which was Monkey Shines. And you can check out my review on my channel of Monkey Shines after you get finished watching this awesome review of The Dark Half. And I'm going to review the film. I'm eventually going to rate the film. But before that, I'm eventually going to unbox this thing and show you the inside. I'm going to talk about that 4K transfer. And I'm going to talk about those other things about the film itself. I'm Dave Watkins, Watkins Films. The film The Dark Half is kind of a Jekyll and Hyde story. It stars Timothy Hutton as Thaddeus Beaumont. Now, Timothy Hutton, I recognized him in this. This is probably what I recognize him from more than anything. But I recognized him from the film Ordinary People. And Ordinary People, he won an Oscar for his role in that. He's the youngest person to win an Oscar at 20 years old. But I probably recognize him from that. I've seen him in other things after this, like Beautiful Girls, and he was in the show The Haunting of Hill House. Unfortunately, he hasn't been in any of the other of Mike Flanagan's shows, but apparently, from watching the behind-the-scenes stuff on this one, some of the people talk about how he is a bit of a method actor, which kind of which can cause some annoyances with, especially with crew people and technical people. It may be a thing for actors to kind of dip into. It's depending on different types of actors. I'm not a method actor when I act. I'm more of I just kind of try to fill it out, but I'm definitely not method like this, and it causes some problems, I think, for production while it's going. But at the same time, George Romero does compliment him on, he thinks that it made him think about some of the stuff a little bit more than he would have otherwise. So the character Timothy Hutton plays, Thaddeus Beaumont, is a writer, which is like Stephen King's a writer, writing about a writer, which that can get a little annoying, and I think the people who aren't writers may not dig that, but it kind of gets into the psyche of a writer, I think, pretty good in the novel and in the film. But basically, he writes two different types of books. One, he writes as himself, and those are very, I guess, more beautiful or posh books, and they're more like uppity and all that. People don't necessarily want to read those because they're probably boring. But people admire them, but they're boring is more probably what's up. But he writes these kind of like crime books about a character named, I think the character in the books, I think his name's Alexis Machine, but he uses a pen name, which is George Stark, to write about this character who goes around and kills people with like a razor knife, like a folding razor knife. He like slits their throats or cuts them up and does all kinds of crazy stuff like that to him. It's a very violent sort of film, like pulpy novels that people are just loving that shit. But he doesn't want to be associated with that, other than he wants to take that money that he's getting from it, but he doesn't want anyone to know that he's doing it. But also the character Thaddeus Beaumont is a college professor. He works at a fairly highfalutin college, and he has a reputation to think about. And probably the students or the parents of the students and his colleagues might not, they'd probably lose a lot of respect for him if they knew that he was writing these kind of smut novels that are, dime store novels that everybody's reading. What happens, like, this other guy finds out that he is both people, and he shows up in his class, and then he tries to blackmail him. So instead of paying the guy off, what he decides to do is basically reveal to everyone that he is this other writer. Now, Stephen King did something to this nature. Not exactly the same, but he did have a pen name, which was Richard Bachman for a little while. He wrote different types of stories under Richard Bachman for a little while, and I guess he eventually owned up to it. So that's kind of where this idea came from. But so basically, instead of paying this jerk off, he goes ahead and they do this photo shoot where they do this photo shoot, and they involve all these other people. His agent and a bunch of other people are involved with it, and they even have this, they have a gravestone that says George Stark on it, and him and his wife played by Amy Madigan here, they stand over it and they take photos, and then they release it, and they're like, guess what, no George Stark anymore. So he's basically saying he's not going to write as George Stark anymore. Amy Madigan, which I think she's really terrific in this, and she plays his wife, who seems, apparently from the interviews, they were both kind of method, but they were kind of on the same page as being method, and you can tell that she's very supportive of him in the film, of the actor, and also of the character in the film, and all the stuff that he ends up having to go through. Now, what happens eventually, since they killed George Stark off, now something I did leave out on the description of the plot at the very beginning of it, it takes place I think 20 something years or further before anything ever happens, when he's a young kid, and maybe early teen, like Thaddeus Beaumont. He has starts having seizures, and he has a tumor in his head. Now these doctors go to operate on that tumor, and they open up his head, and they find an eyeball, a working eyeball inside of his head, and it's a pretty gruesome shot. Now what they say is that he absorbed his twin while his mom was pregnant in her belly there, and so but still parts of the twin were in his head, so they took all that out, and they said they buried it somewhere. What's interesting is the character Thaddeus Beaumont also has two twin babies. Now, these twins didn't absorb each other. Now, this apparently happens. They say, I guess it happens. I didn't look it up. But that's what they say in the book and in the movie, that this happens sometimes. They absorb each other in the womb. So back to present day time, they buried George Stark, but then George Stark kind of comes to life, like a Jekyll and Hyde situation. He actually it doesn't show all this, but it starts showing him going, and he starts killing everybody who was involved with this whole killing George Stark off, like the photographer, the agent, and pretty much most of the people who were involved start getting killed one at a time. The cops catch on to this, and they think their prime suspect is Thaddeus Beaumont, so they go to him. Michael Rooker plays the cop, the Alan Pangborn. Alan Pangborn is a character who also appears in Stephen King's novel Needful Things, and he also appears in the film Needful Things, which came out the same year, 1993. Ed Harris plays him in this one. He's the protagonist of the film. Here he is also plays he is the same character played by Michael Rooker. Now, he plays a lot different than Ed Harris plays him in Needful Things, but Rooker does a really good job. I like Michael Rooker generally as an actor, and he does a nice job here. So there are two characters. There's Thaddeus Beaumont and George Stark, both played by Timothy Hutton. Now, when Timothy Hutton plays George Stark, wow, it is fairly an amazing performance, and that's, I think, what was getting everybody talking about him being method. He actually wanted his separate trailer for George Stark. While he was acting as George Stark, he wanted a different trailer. So everyone's like, okay, maybe you're taking this a little bit too far. But he turns in a quite convincing performance. And he looks a little different, too. They did some prosthetic work on him that looks fairly impressive. The movie plays with these aspects, and it is a little overlong. It does sometimes seem to drag a little bit. It's not as exciting as you would hope it would be. I do like the film. I am a fan of it, but I do think it isn't as exciting as it should be. But it is a fairly strong film, and it's probably better than what most people think that it is. And it didn't do too well at the box office. I think it I think the budget was maybe 15 million, and it made about 10.5 million or something like that. But it did eventually go on to onto HBO and all that, so maybe it made some money different from the box office draws on it. But I did see it on HBO as well. I saw it in the theater, and I read the book, and I saw it on HBO later on. So I've seen it several times, and even upon this rewatch of it, I still enjoyed it. I mean, I knew kind of everything that was going to happen, but something kind of seems a little off with it. But I still do think that especially the performances in this film are quite terrific by most of the cast. And Timothy Hutton, particularly as his dual role as George Stark, especially, is a lot different than Thaddeus Beaumont. Now, sometimes with the Thaddeus Beaumont character, I think he kind of he's playing like a really good type of character, but he kind of starts to get a little more edgy as it goes on. And that's by design. Now, he's basically fighting for existence with this George Stark character, but he does start to kind of lose it, and he yells a lot in some parts of the film, which I guess, again, it does make sense that he is kind of losing it. He seems very guilty. Like when the cops come to him, he seems very guilty, but the cop doesn't arrest him because he doesn't really have the evidence to put him in jail, but he keeps saying that he could and he should, but he doesn't. But he probably can't because he doesn't have the right evidence to arrest him at the time. Now, it's been a long time since I've read this novel, but I do remember upon watching the film that it was very close to the book. And to me, it's probably the most faithful Stephen King adaptation from a novel to screen out there. I think George Romero really put a lot of work into trying to keep the spirit of the novel, and he makes a few changes. He changes one of the supporting characters from a man to a woman, which it works actually in this instance, and but other than that, for the most part, he films the novel, and I think maybe that may hinder the movie a little bit. It makes it a little more tedious. Maybe it makes it feel a little more methodical, but I do admire George for trying to do his best to bring this novel to screen the way that it was written. So let's take a look at the physical packaging here. And this is a Vinegar Syndrome slipbox release. It is quite impressive as far as the actual physicality of the slipbox. I do question the design a little bit. I do like that this is like this red kind of sticks out from the back, though some of the sparrows, which I do like the idea of the sparrows, it does get a little murky looking. Now this is a slip cover here. Now we have the writings. This is the dark half, and as you can see, all this scribble writing and stuff like that. Now this is what happens in the film when Thaddeus Beaumont writes as himself. He types it all so everybody can read it. But when he's George Stark, he actually gets out of like a black pencil, which you see here, and he writes everything all like in a crazy way that some of it's misspelled, and it just doesn't look too good, but people like reading that anyway. And on the inside of this, we have the same art design that's on the outside cover, yet it kind of looks even more murky without this different shiny thing going on. I think it looks even more of a muted in a way. I do like the original artwork better, though I do like it that they had an artist rendering of as well. But here's the original artwork, and I really like the way this stands out. I do like the colors and all that. I remember seeing this poster back in the day. I thought it really stood out. It looked pretty cool. On the inside here, we have two discs. We have a 4K and a Blu-ray. So I was able to look at both of them. I do not have the previous Blu-ray of this or the previous DVD or anything to that nature, so I couldn't really compare it. The only thing I had to compare it to was my memory of the way it looked before, which did not hold up too good. One other thing, we have a booklet, and in this booklet we have essays and some pictures of the film, things of that nature. So here's some information about the film itself. It says the transfer itself. It says it contains the 122-minute feature presentation of the Dark Half in Dolby Vision and HDR. It's newly scanned and restored from its 35mm camera negative. And it says the Blu-ray should be the same transfer, though I did notice it does look a little different. And that's probably because of the HDR and the Dolby Vision. Now, both the Blu-ray and the 4K, the transfer looks quite impressive. I think that in general, I think they did a really good job with this transfer. It looks quite clean to me. It does look very filmic. You do see that film grain, and occasionally there's a lot of cool camera moves in this film. as far as the way George Romero was having to handle some of these situations. And especially impressive when you see Timothy Hutton playing two roles in the same frame. There's some exterior day scenes in this, and they look quite vivid. The colors look really pop out at you. Oftentimes it looks like it's kind of in between. It's kind of a little bit at the end of fall, maybe turning into winter for most of the film, but some of those fall colors are still there. They quite pop, and they still have some greens in there. The sharpness and the clarity, it's all really well done. This was a fairly high budget film for the time, and everything still holds up really good as far as the way that it looks. There's a really cool dream sequence in it about in the middle way that takes place in a cabin. Here's a picture of Amy Madigan's character here. She looks all like a porcelain doll, and then it cracks open, and it's like a really cool dream sequence. Now I want to show you a few. I took some stills of the TV with my camera, with my phone actually. I took up some pictures of that. Now here is a picture of the Blu-ray, and here is the same shot in 4K. All right, now you do see a little bit of difference there in the HDR grading. It does look a little bit different. I'm going to do a couple other options. Here's one in Blu-ray, and we're going to go. There's a 4K version of it. And one more time, here we are, the Blu-ray. This is an interior shot, and then we're going to go to, here we go, 4K. You do see some difference there, and really the color timing may be a little different on the 4K. There's a few exterior night scenes here. The black levels look very solid here. They look right on the level. They don't look murky, and they don't look like a black crush. They look right where they need to be, and they look quite impressive in general. So let's talk about the special effects. There are some pretty good practical special effects in this film. And now it does kind of get ahead of itself at the end. Now they had a lot of trouble with the sparrows. Now before I get into the sparrow part and the very end of the film, which I'm not necessarily going to spoil it. I'm going to give a little light spoilers for it. But there are some razor cuts in this film, like people get sliced in the faces, and there's some blood and things of that nature. So there are some fairly impressive practical special effects, especially when you see Timothy Hutton's transformation into George Stark and things of that nature. But when you get to the end, there is even more impressive looking stuff, including some puppet work and things of that nature that you may not even realize is a puppet. Now, they had a lot of trouble with these sparrows. They tried to get like 5,000 sparrows into a room, and they were hoping that it was going to be like a crazy like sparrow thing, like a murky, just sparrows covering everything. But it didn't work out. The sparrows did not respond. They all just kind of hung out on the outside of it. So they ended up having to do a bunch of early CGI to make the sparrows. Sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it looks really bad, but sometimes it looks pretty decent. Now, one of the last shots, you have the sparrows all flying off in this kind of another kind of netherworld sort of, I guess, into the sky, and it's a cool idea, but it doesn't really look that good, unfortunately. And this movie is one of those that it does end kind of on a nice note, but it does seem like it kind of needed like maybe another scene. It just seemed all of a sudden it's like boom, boom, okay, we're done, end. Let's go ahead and rate this movie. I'm gonna rate this on a scale from 1 to 5, with 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. I'm gonna give The Dark Half, I'm gonna give it 3.5 stars. I do like this film. I think it's a little slow, but I do admire the film. As far as what Vinegar Syndrome has done here, especially with their slip box, and more impressively, their 4K transfer, I'm going to give them a 4-star rating. I think they did a terrific job restoring this movie, and it does look friggin' fantastic. Now, if you would do me a favor, if you haven't done so already, if you would subscribe to my channel, that would be really awesome. And I'm going to put a box here. Now, you see this box? You can click on that thing, and you can go watch my review of Monkey Shines, also directed by George Romero. So if you hit that box, and just remember, I'm Dave Watkins, Watkins Films. Thanks for watching.